I'd like to ask you to think with me a little bit about what we know about words. What are some of the most obvious, well-organized, well-agreed-upon characteristics of a language, whether it's English or any other? Well, I can run them down into a series of numbers. Let me begin. In the first place, we can make a distinction between technical terms and non-technical terms. Now, by the technical terms, I mean all those words used in any specialized area in chemistry, physics, TV, the law, and elsewhere, where the range of use of a word will be very narrow. Thus, for example, if I ask for sodium biosulfite, if there's such a thing, in a drugstore in New York City or in San Diego, I'm very likely to get the very same thing. That is, sodium biosulfite is a word with very narrow, limited uses. It's a technical term. We've stipulated, we've decided that the word will have that usage and not very many others. And in the law, there are hundreds of such terms, and in engineering and electricity and physics and so on and so on. But it isn't those words I'm interested in. I'm interested in the hundreds of thousands of others which are the non-technical terms. Now, the non-technical terms are all those that I will be using most of the time in this talk today. They are the words like run and talk and how and feel. That is all of the words which we will be using 95%, or it's almost 99% of our talking time. Now, the peculiar and interesting thing about these words is, take, for example, the word run. Well, it will have many uses. I can talk about running a race or running a mile or home run or sheep run or something having to do with a little boy's nose or colors running or run on a bank or run in a stocking. And each one of these uses is quite different. And the range, we will say, of the uses of the word run will be very broad, whereas the range of a technical term like electron might be very much narrower. Well, that's the first thing we know, that many, many words. Take the word strike, for example. It's used in baseball to miss, in fishing to hit, in labor activities to go away from, in boxing to hit, and so on and so on. The word fast, sometimes in the sense of going in a great rush. Sometimes when we talk about a fast color, we mean staying put in one place. So my first characteristic, that is the first point. Words may be used in a narrow or wide range, depending. Second thing we know that there are tremendous regional variations in the uses of words. That a word will be used in one part of the country in one way and in another part of the country in another way. I was in a meeting in San Francisco some time back, and in the middle of the morning, our chairman looked up and said, well, I think we've gone far enough. Why don't we interrupt this and go out and have some coffee and snails? And my first impulse was to say, isn't it a little early for that sort of thing? Well, snails in San Francisco, when you ask for them, you get something quite different from what you will get, say, if you ask for them in Chicago. A snail in San Francisco is a wound-up sweet roll that looks very much like a snail. I was in Montgomery, Alabama some time ago and talked to a friend of mine who turned to me and said, when the meeting is over, I'll carry you to town. And my first impulse was to say, thanks very much, but can't I go on my own theme? But carry you to town, for him, merely meant the fact that he was offering me a ride in his car. And thus there are regional variations that occur, and perhaps you can think of some in usage. Of course, some of the greatest differences occur between usage in this country and in England. If you travel to Great Britain, for example, you readily discover this tremendous variation. In England, for example, a dessert is a sweet. The waitress will ask you, will you have, what kind of sweet will you have? A cop is very rarely he's a bobby. Garters are suspenders. If you ask for suspenders, you will not get what you're likely to get in a store in this country. Suspenders there are braces. Bloody, I might say, is a curse word in England and is very rarely used in polite company. Taffy is toffee. Syrup is treacle. You have cakes with treacle. Soft drinks are minerals. Think of the range of words we have to talk about soft drinks in this country. A rumble seat is a dicky. The second floor is the first floor. When someone lives on the first floor, you have to climb up. A roller coaster is a switchback railway, and so on and so on. That is, one of the very readily recognized things is that words in different parts of the country, and even in different jobs, a man in the printing business or in the carpentry business or the TV business will begin to develop a bunch of words that he will use in his own way. A dolly in the TV jargon is not exactly what it will be to a little girl going into the 10-cent store. That is, there's a range of uses, and we're accustomed to that. And, of course, a third thing that we know about words, and that is that words change historically. A word, when Chaucer, for example, talked of having in one of the tales of someone having been to a solemn party, he did not mean the kind of party that we would think he meant. A solemn party for him was one that ended in a drunken brawl. It was a party which became solemn. For us, the usage is quite different. Think, for example, of the changes in possible uses. Just a few centuries ago, when Middle English was spoken, King James once referred to St. Paul's Cathedral as amusing, awful, and artificial. Now, if someone were to call a creation of yours amusing, awful, and artificial, or of mine, I should be disposed not to think too highly of it. But then, that statement was a rare compliment. King James meant that for amusing, he meant amazing. Awful, he used in the sense of awe-inspiring, and artificial, by the word artificial, he meant artistic. And thus he was paying a rare compliment in words which, if used by one of us probably today, would be a rather derogatory kind of insult. Think also of the history of the changes of the uses of words. The word cowboy. The Dictionary of American English gives countless numbers of these fascinating stories, but the word cowboy is of some interest. This was not originally a Western word at all. Before the days of dude ranches, this word was used in an utterly different sense. Indeed, it was an Eastern word used to describe George III's fifth column in the American colonies. The cowboys of the last quarter of the 18th century were Tory sympathizers who wandered through the woods at night ringing cowbells. Unsuspecting American patriots, hearing the tinkle, would sally forth with lanterns in search of the straying bossies and bessies supposedly attached to the bells, and were promptly blitzkrieged by enemy blunderbusses. Now, the cowboy was a Tory fifth columnist, a quisling, a person who sold out. And then one can find some other characteristics of the language. Another one of the characteristics that we're thoroughly aware of is the continuous coinage of new words. That is, in our society, English is growing at a tremendous pace. And the history of the development and creation of new words is an extremely interesting study, of which I can merely touch on at the moment. John Milton, for example, was a famous coiner of words. By the way, the technical word for a word which is coined is a neologism. And most students of language will think of the word neologism in fairly much the same way. But here are some of the words that Milton coined. Dimensionless, infinitude, emblazonry, bannered, anarch, satanic, echoing, irradiant, pandemonium. Mark Twain in this country was a prolific coiner of words. A word those of you interested in poker may or may not recognize that Mark Twain coined many of the phrases that will be used. Words like passing the buck, four-flushing, sitting pretty, and New Deal. That word New Deal was not one that was coined in the 30s. Indeed, General Sherman back in 1863 once said, Charleston is not taken, the war is prolonged, and but little chance of its ending until we have a New Deal.